We are really excited today for our third and final day of the workshop. We want to thank you all for hanging in there with us for a slightly different format of workshop. We are really thrilled with all the presentations that everyone has been giving and are really looking forward to what we have in store for you today. So thank you very much for being here. Today, I get the special honor of introducing you all to Dr. Sandy MacDonald, Alexander MacDonald here, who's joining us. One note before we get started, if everyone could turn off their webcams and go ahead and mute their microphones if they haven't already. We found presentations go better with webcams off. So thank you everyone for doing that for us. And one other thing I want to throw in there before I pass it over to Sandy, I just really want to give a huge shout out to Carrie McDougall and the whole Office of Education for helping to coordinate this. Carrie has been behind all of the SOS workshops along with her office, and we are just so thankful for the way they have supported the SOS project through the years and brought this whole group together. So thank you to Carrie. We are so appreciative of everything that you do for this project. And now we're going to move on to our keynote. So Sandy MacDonald retired from a professional career that spanned over 50 years in July 2020. He lives in Boulder, Colorado, where he is writing a book on the global solution to climate crisis, which I want to hear more about this. He started his career at a as a U.S. Air Force officer. His BS is in math and physics, and he has an MS and PhD in meteorology and a minor in computer science. He had a 42-year career in NOAA and was a senior executive for 25 years. He led NOAA's largest research lab, the Earth System Research Laboratory, where the whole Boulder team works, from 2006 to 2016. He was the first director of the GLOBE program, a global education program. During his federal career, he received 4 presidential rank awards. He holds 2 U.S. patents, and he was the president of the American Meteorological Society in 2015. From 2016 to 2020, Dr. MacDonald was the leader of the weather program at Spire Global. He retired as the chief science officer of that satellite company in 2020. And the reason he is here today, Sandy is the inventor of NOAA's Science on a Sphere, which has been installed in nearly 180 venues around the world. Sandy is not only the inventor, but also an avid user. He has given hundreds of SOS presentations around the world, many of which I've had the honor to attend. His passion for science and sharing it with others is contagious, as I'm sure you'll see today. Thank you so much for being with us today, Sandy.
Okay. So am I ready to go here?
Yep, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can make the PowerPoint show up. All right, Beth, I'm kind of asking you if you can see this.
It looks good. Yep, we see your PowerPoint.
And now, can you see it on the whole screen?
It looks like it's cutting off on the top a little bit. But
actually, yeah, it does look cut off on all sides, I think.
Maybe escape and try again.
Okay. I'll try again, and it's not a big deal. I can just brief from the regular one. I've had trouble with these before. Is that still cut off?
It is. It's like doing a 16 by 10 instead of 16 by 9.
Huh. Is it good enough to use, or should I just go?
I think it's good enough to use.
All right. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank everyone at NOAA for inviting me to do this. As mentioned, I had a 42-year, actually it's 43-year career in NOAA. I always thought it was the agency with the best mission, and it's fun to see so many faces that I worked with. And I think you all will agree that Science on a Sphere is a great way to look at Earth's ocean and atmosphere. And that's the middle name of NOAA. So it's been a really great part of my career at NOAA to see the efforts on Science on a Sphere and to see it go around the world the way it has. As Beth mentioned, I sit here in my COVID quarantine. I don't have COVID, but I've spent the last 9 months basically sitting here in this office, and I'm all excited about getting a vaccination here in a month or so I can get out a little more. But I'm writing a book on the climate crisis based on a paper that I did in Nature Climate Change that shows that wind and solar are the cheapest form of energy if there is the ability to move it around in transmission networks. So that's what I'm doing now. Back in 1994, I was asked by the NOAA research director if I would work with Vice President Gore for a year on a project that he had called GLOBE. And it was a really interesting year. I'd meet with him once every few weeks. And it was, of course, his first year in the White House. And he really had written a book called Earth in the Balance. And one of the things that he and I discussed a lot was how do people really understand something as complicated as climate change? He had the idea that writing and books weren't enough. People had to visualize things. And I remember him saying to me, well, you're in charge of a lab that does a lot of visualization. What do you think? That kind of percolated for a couple of years before I really came up with an idea that I thought maybe did it justice. And it started in the 1995. So it started with a beach ball. That's not actually me holding that beach ball. You know, that guy's got a lot of hair, and I don't actually, even in those days, have much hair. But I painted the beach ball white. I got a couple ladders in my garage, and I set up video projectors, and I started to think, how could this work? Could we display things on a sphere? And it's probably pretty clear to everybody on this call that there's a little bit of complexity to it. There's the issue of, can you get a really good focus on something that is different distances from the projector? That's related to depth of field, and it sort of was related to, okay, what's going to be a good size for the sphere? I had originally basically had the idea that a sphere has to be a personal sphere. I mean, we are on a sphere, but it doesn't really look like much of a sphere when you look out the window. And, you know, there could be a real small one or a medium-sized one. And partly on the basis of the technical, you know, focus and optics and the equipment available, we ended up with the idea of a 6-foot sphere because it allowed us to have really a personal sphere, or something that you could walk around and see and think about, and yet not so big or so small that it really, you can kind of think of it as the sphere is about the same size as a person in a way. So it's something we can relate to as people. So that was in 95. And I thought about it. I basically was able to do a couple things with those two projectors in my garage. I was able to synchronized. That was a little bit of a hassle for me, who's somewhat technical, but not super. And you could see that there was issues like you want the same number of photons coming off the sphere in each direction, so it doesn't look like part of the sphere is poorly lit and part is well lit, and all those other things that people don't think about. There actually is interference between the old-time projectors. I'm not sure about projectors nowadays. However, fast forward, and by 2001, I had concluded that we really needed to try to do something with the sphere. And I got help from all kinds of people. I'm going to come back to that. But we came up with an artist's concept. And you can see this fairly elaborate structure, which we actually did create and use for the sphere. But the primary point is there were a whole lot of things that went into our thinking. Our first sphere we made out of fiberglass, and the thing weighed 200 pounds. When we put it out, I always got worried it was going to fall down and start rolling, and the kids would be running in front of it like something out of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the sphere is rolling down the path toward the poor old Indiana Jones. So we came up with an idea of what it ought to look like. And that was kind of the easy part. I had been able, with the help of a lot of people, to create something that I thought would be really valuable to educate the world about the oceans and the atmosphere, and particularly I was oriented toward climate change. So let me just stop here, and I'm going to, for the first couple times, I'm going to ask for questions, but only ones that are really relevant that you might need right now, and ask Beth if there's any questions.
So far, we're looking good. No questions yet.
So if you have questions that are kind of clarification, I'll stop a couple more times and we'll try and hit them before I get to the end, and then we're going to have time for questions at the end. So in the Earth System Research Lab, we're in a building called the David Skaggs Research Center, and there was a big basement downstairs, and we started experimenting with different spheres. We had, carbon spheres, fiberglass spheres, spheres built out of icosahedrons, and different materials. And we also started experimenting with how do you get a really good sort of look over the whole sphere. Nowadays, of course, that doesn't seem so hard, but in those days we were trying out a lot of things, and it was, to be honest, a lot of fun. So we set this up in 2002, and I thought, well, this is our opportunity. The real problem is going to be, how do we make this into the kind of program that really can be a global education program? So as people came out, people such as Louisa Koch, who may or may not be on this, and other heads of NOAA line offices, and my argument was, hey, NASA gets all this credit and does all these things. We in NOAA have this wonderful mission of oceans and atmosphere. How can we show the world what we're doing? And so what you see here, of course, is the world in this first realization of science on a sphere. And then over in the right, you see the sun. And of course, I coined the name Science on a Sphere because, as somebody who's loved science my entire life, I felt like there were a lot of things that we could do. But ultimately, science it sort of sells itself if you can visualize it correctly. So that was the basic idea that we had with Science on a Sphere, and this was our first version. So go forward in time a little bit. What happened was I went to each of the NOAA line offices and I said, we have this system that can be really a valuable part of our mission to educate and show the people of the world, you know, the oceans, the atmosphere, the sun, all of which are part of NOAA's mission. And I went to each of the line offices and said, I need a little bit of money. By definition, in those days, a little bit of the money was about $250,000 from each of them, because to really develop it right was going to be about $1 million development. And they were actually all really excited and really helpful. I'll come back to that momentarily. So by 2003, we were ready to show that structure that I mentioned. And the President's Science Advisor, John Marburger, gave a little presentation. I want you to see something really important, and that is, if you can see my cursor, there's Carrie McDougall. So Carrie's been a big part of this from the beginning. And of course, there's a number of other people that were involved with it. But the basic idea was that Department of Commerce, which is what NOAA's department is, were very supportive, and they had this big dedication. That's in a beautiful first floor of the Department of Commerce. So that was a great thing. And I want to say that people think, well, you know, the bureaucracy is stodgy and they don't like new ideas and so on. I can say, having, you know, been there for a career, I'm very proud to have been part of a Department of Commerce and NOAA, where I believe that people work hard, very hard, to deal with these great issues that we face, such as what's the future of our planet, of our atmosphere and our oceans as the carbon dioxide floods out. So here is another presentation. This wasn't done by me. This was done by NASA. And so this was in Washington, D.C. And we see Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip sitting there looking at science on a sphere. And the gentleman that gave this presentation, he and I talked quite a bit about this. But I apologize to all the British subjects in the audience, but I'm going to try and say what he said Queen Elizabeth said, which was, "Science on a sphere is the best thing I saw in America." So I admit my Queen Elizabeth accent isn't wonderful, but, and I don't hear any response from the audience here, but it was a real kind of a treat to realize that even the Queen thought it was a pretty great thing. So I'm going to mention some of the people who really made this a reality. In the upper left is Louisa Koch. I'm not sure if that's Maya or Gemma, but Louisa and I went through a couple of tough years in OAR. And for Louisa, she was starting a family and facing a health crisis, and she really supported this idea that NOAA needed to really be able to show its science. And so I want to say again how much I've appreciated her support through the years. Somebody you probably don't hear much about is Will von Dauster. Will was the person that helped me in the very original sphere. I was puzzling about things like, how could we set up the projectors, and how many, was it going to be 2, 3, 4, 20 or whatever. Bill Vendel ran the program through many early years. And Rhonda Lang really kind of organized a program where we could take the sphere many places and try and show people what it could do. I think a person that probably has more credit for science on a sphere than almost anybody is David Himes. David came to my office late one night, and he he said, well, I'm not really interested in this job that you have, but my wife talked me into coming and talking to you. And so I said, oh, okay, that's good. And it was like 5 o'clock on a winter afternoon. So I took him downstairs to see Science on a Sphere, and I talked about education and how this was going to be a fabulous global program. And by the time he walked out on that winter evening, he said, I want to work on this. I'm going to join this. So it's like many times since, it sold itself. So I'm now going to stop and ask if there's any questions, Beth, that you've gotten that I should answer before I move on.
Well, Sandy, we've gotten a lot of critique on your English accent.
I'm not surprised.
And we do have one question that came in. Did NOAA ask you to create and develop the sphere? Did you do it on your own time? What were the processes that allowed the creative freedom for this to happen within NOAA? And how do you think that can be replicated elsewhere?
It really was an idea that I had, and I didn't even really initially think, well, I should go try and create a program in NOAA and try and work it out, kind of business-wise, so it could go to many, many museums around the world. So it was an idea that I had that you can see it kind of, it took a few years between when I originally had the idea and figured out how to kind of make it work. But I think that's true of a lot of things. People say, well, there's no, you're not allowed initiative in federal agencies, the bureaucracies are too stifling and so on. But that was never the experience I had. I had lots of ideas where people would say, that's crazy. I'd think about it for a while and say, yep, that is a crazy idea, and I'd get rid of the idea. But very often, for good ideas, they sell themselves. And I found NOAA to be a very favorable place where if there was some good idea, and this is not just one by itself. I was lucky to be in a career where I and others were able to make big differences because I think dedicated people who see the potential of creative and entrepreneurial aspects of their employees make a difference, and I certainly found that in NOAA. Any other questions, Beth?
I think that's good for now. And just a reminder to everyone, please turn off your webcams.
Okay, so moving on, what did we want to do with Science on a Sphere? One of the things we thought a lot about was education. That for me, I fell in love with science when I was like 8 years old. I just loved it. I loved weather. I think it was partly the violence of weather, but it was just something that was always out there and pretty wonderful. Teaching everybody from, 2 to 100 about our planet was a big goal. And the climate crisis itself is something that is hard for people to understand. And I felt when I created Science on a Sphere, this would be a way to show the Earth, turning red because it was heating up. And finally, when you look at the Earth and you walk into the room with Science on a Sphere and you see it from a distance and you get closer, you're really like an astronaut that is away from our little tiny blue dot that you get closer, but you can see it's not the whole universe. The universe is huge and it's out there, and we're just a tiny little speck. And we have to keep remembering that when we think about the stewardships of our ocean and atmosphere. So the first place we actually went, and this was really quite an operation, is we had a teacher in one of the schools nearby, and we set up Science on a Sphere, and we had it there for, I think, 3 or 4 days. And what we did was we were trying to understand how people relate to it. We had lots of questions. We had different teachers come in and comment about how this could be used for education. So it was a real learning experience for us and something that informed us as we moved on to later parts of the program. So what is it about science on a sphere? Well, the Earth's complicated. This is something from my most recent job. I worked for a satellite company for 4 years, and we were building a version of what NASA's done with a satellite called Cygnus GNSS-R. I'll interpret that for you as a GNSS is a global navigation satellite like GPS, and the R stands for reflection. So when the GPS signal hits the Earth and bounces back, a little satellite can capture that. And voila, it does two things. On land, it tells you how much soil moisture there is. So we're looking at Africa, and you can see the Congo Basin, and you can see the Sahara Desert, and there's some interesting parts. These dark parts are where it's very moist, and the white parts where it's not moist. So it's a pretty neat kind of thing that these global observing satellites are not just good for science. They help us kind of understand and beautiful the Earth is. So teaching people about our planet was a big deal, kind of our second goal. And all of you know this, that people can't grapple with. They say, well, how can just little people on the surface of the Earth affect the Earth? And when I would do my Science on a Sphere presentations, the ability to see these great clouds of sulfur dioxide and black carbon were the way I could show people that we're not just little in our effects on the atmosphere and ocean. And of course, it's the life of the Earth that is such a crucial part of the system. If you look at this image, we see the March of Life, and people, when they'd see this, they'd say, wow, I didn't understand the ocean life. So it's a way to teach, the people of really what's happening. The other goal that we had is we wanted to affect the policymakers, the people who go to meetings like the UN Framework on Climate Change. We went to the 2009 Copenhagen Conference, and this is from the 2015 Paris Conference. I think the main thing that Beth and I were trying to do is they used to give away these big candy bars, and we would actually try to be first in line to grab all those. I came home with about 30 pounds of chocolate, which then I decided maybe I shouldn't eat given the aspects of chocolate and what it does to your weight. But anyway, we were there. The big thing about being at these was I got to talk to people. So this is a gentleman, the mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, and we were booth babes. We weren't in there negotiating the next big climate agreement, but the people who were would come talk to us, and we would show things, and they would want to talk. Well, wait a minute, here's what we're talking about in terms of the climate agreement. What do you think? So it was really a wonderful opportunity for Beth and I and the other people that were at the Paris and Copenhagen to talk to policymakers, and our entree to that was Science on a Sphere. And finally, we are one little speck. We are one beautiful planet, but we're kind of alone. There's the Earth and our moon. It's our only home, and everyone knows that if you don't take care of your home, you're making a huge mistake. So with that, I'll stop. I think all of you know a lot more about how it's progressed with time. I have my email here for anybody that wants to send me an email, ask a question, or anything else. And with that, Beth, I'll go back to you and see if there's any questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Sandy. That was great. It's fun to walk down memory lane and see all those faces of everyone who's been involved in this project. So here's a good question to get you started. What are some of your favorite ways that Science on a Sphere has been used? That's from Becca in the Office of Education.
Favorite ways that Science on a Sphere has been used. I think the biggest thing to me is it kind of excites people. So one thing I've been able to do a few times is I go to a museum. A couple of years ago, I guess it was like 3 or 4 years ago, I was in London. I was on Imperial College, and so I went over to the museum. They've got all these old steam engines and stuff, and they have Science on a Sphere. And I sat there for 2 hours, and I sat, and a woman brought in her, I think, I would say school-age son. He might have been 8 or 9. And I could just see the excitement in this child that mirrored the excitement that I had about science. And I thought, maybe I'm exaggerating, but it seemed to me that a little bit of that fire that you get when you're really young and all at once the world is more interesting, I could see that in this child. So I think the big thing for me about Science on a Sphere is the fact that it does inspire people. Back to you, Beth.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, we just had a comment in the chat that said, from Rachel Wellman, SOS is a brilliant educational tool for sure. I'm not kidding. Seeing it in an elementary school was what made me decide to pursue a career in formal K-12 education back in 2014.
Yay.
So another question for you would be, when you think about the future of SOS, how do you think new audiences might be able to use the SOS technology?
What I've seen over time is, like with anything, people get creative and they start doing more interesting things. And so I've only had a couple opportunities, and obviously the last 9 months, kind of with home arrest, I haven't gotten out. But what I could see when I have heard what people are doing and actually gone into, we have one of our Science on a Spheres in the Denver Museum here. And when I've gone and watched and seen how the docents are using it and so on, I just see improvements of people's ability to use it to convey things. And so I guess I don't have anything specific other than it's a powerful tool, but it's like probably Thomas Edison felt about his first little movie is, that's the first creation of content, but it's really content that gets into the psyche of the human mind. And you all are the people who are at the forefront, who are figuring out how can we do this better. So my congratulations to all of you, and say I keep seeing it improve.
So here's a NOAA question for you. Given funding uncertainty, what are your thoughts about SOS sustainment? Can it live in NOAA forever?
Now that's one that I'm going to pass on, since I'm not in NOAA. I'm usually to a fault willing to offer an opinion on anything, but I think I'll pass on this. If we have Louisa Koch on, maybe she could say something. She could also tell us whether that was Maya or Gemma in the picture, but I'm not sure she's on.
That sounds good. So how about...
Well, there she is. She's ready to say something.
Hi, Sandy. So good to see you. And that was Gemma in the picture. Thanks for asking. She's about to graduate from high school, so that was many years ago. Absolutely. I hope to see the Science on the Sphere supported by NOAA for many, many years to come. It is still, and it is It is the most significant icon that NOAA has. It helps communicate the most important messages NOAA has to give. It provides an excellent platform for our data sets, and I am deeply committed to ensuring that it stays. And luckily for me, you've left a lot of people behind who are equally dedicated to ensuring that the sphere continues to thrive.
Thank you.
So Sandy, here's a question for you. Did you ever imagine SOS being in so many different locations? Here at the National Weather Center, we love seeing the kids immediately run towards the sphere and look and wonder. So honored to hear you speak.
Well, I'm honored because I think, you know, for me, I thought initially that people would really like it, but I had hopes that really grew after we had it running, and I could see how magnetic it was. People really liked it, and that's when I started to get sort of grandiose visions of maybe this could be around the world. And someday I'm going to do a calculation of how many people have actually looked at it. I got an estimate once that sometime toward the end of the 2020s, maybe a billion Earthlings would have looked at Science on a Sphere, and that's pretty good because you want to get into the head of a billion people if we're going to make people understand and take the action we need to deal with the climate crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. So how about this one? Will your book have SOS dataset reference points? Can you tell us more about your book or how your ideas have evolved for solutions to climate change?
The only thing I do in the book is I do have like a page where I talk about kind of how I created Science on a Sphere and my idea that I think it's part of the kind of global education that we need to face this kind of complicated and non-intuitive problem of climate change and, you know, things in the atmosphere and ocean. So the book is basically about the threat, not so much the threat to the oceans and atmosphere, but rather solutions. And being in NOAA, it was always a little bit of a pull to try to convince people we ought to think about solutions. But then when we think of wind and solar energy, they are really the best source of decarbonized energy. So the book is really saying we have to do an energy transition, and the current sort of exponential growth of carbon. In fact, I've even looked recently, there's lots of people talking about, oh, we're all doing very well, and you know, I don't drive as often and stuff like that. But the truth is that the global problem is not so much developed countries who have been pouring CO2 into the earth. It's the fact that everybody deserves a good life, and good life involves energy, and we can't have anywhere from 12 to 16 billion people putting out the kind of CO2 that we do. So it's a global problem, and that's what the book says.
Okay. I look forward to reading it when it comes out, Sandy. What are some crazy ideas that you have wanted to do with SOS and didn't get to?
All right. Well, one crazy idea was our newest senator, John Hickenlooper, came to the Copenhagen 2009 conference, UN Framework Convention conference. And I got about 3 hours to talk to Hickenlooper. So he became our governor, and then now he's going to be our senator. And I said, John, let's put up a 20-foot sphere in the middle of the Denver airport. And he said, I love it. Let's put up a 20-foot sphere in the middle of the Denver airport. After sort of more rational thought about it, I decided, I don't think that's a great idea. So we never did do the 20-foot sphere in the middle of the Denver airport, but that has to count for at least a little crazy idea. Everybody that comes through there, which is like literally, I think 70 million people a year would have seen it. So that would have been kind of a nice display, but there were a bunch of reasons that it turned out that it wasn't such a great idea. So that's a crazy idea.
I remember that crazy idea. So speaking of policymakers, what responses or feedback have you observed from policymakers that have viewed SOS? Do you think it makes a difference to show them SOS?
Well, we had a lot of examples of people who were at these two big global conferences, and I honestly think it made a difference. I had really lots of chances in Washington. You saw that one where we were at the Department of Commerce. It's in the Smithsonian. When we opened the Ocean Hall, I think I talked to several congressmen and senators at different places. And I really do think that, people tend to think, well, the policy establishment is so giant and so polarized and so difficult that nothing you can do makes any difference. And, I want to say no. I want to say you all are at the forefront of your chance to talk to people. And when they see something like Science on a Sphere, their minds have opened a little bit. It may not be giant, but they're willing to think about things. And when you show some of these effects and they think about life on the planet, and they think about one of the ones that I used to love to show, which is the increasing acidity of the oceans. I actually had a U.S. senator, I probably shouldn't mention names, but he was from Georgia. Okay, anyway, I had a U.S. senator, and he said, well, you can't trust these climate models. I said, well, you can't trust, maybe you don't want to trust the climate models, but look at the ocean acidity. That's just simple chemistry. The ocean is going to get so acid that you can't even have shellfish in the ocean. And that is not like a climate model. That's just simple chemistry. And honestly, I don't know how it affected him from the future of that. That was quite a few years. We went to the G7 meeting at Sea Island, Georgia, which was how I happened to meet him. But I think the opportunity many times in life is maybe you don't know if it's going to have an effect, but it's certainly going to be, you're certainly not going to affect things unless you're willing to speak up and take advantage of those opportunities that you get.
Yeah, absolutely. So one last question for you here before we have to wrap up. At Broomfield Middle School, that first place where you showed SOS to students, what was the feedback from the school children? And did that inspire you to keep going?
Absolutely. Every time we showed Science on a Sphere, and especially when because it was really hard for us to do that. I remember, trying to figure out how we could get this into the school and how we were going to organize the children so that we actually got real feedback. That really galvanized us. It wasn't the only thing. We actually had a bunch of other experiences like that, like the first time we went to Washington, D.C., and we had the NOAA Science Center, and we put it in there, and the interactions we had with people, generally, they just kept reinforcing this has got a lot of potential. And the reaction of the school children was a huge part of that.
Excellent. And I think anyone who's presented SOS here knows seeing kids get excited about it is just completely inspiring and encourages our work. Well, thank you so much, Sandy. We'll share this chat with you. There's so many great comments about the history of science on a sphere and everything you've done. We really appreciate you joining us today. And feel free to stay with us as Stephen brings us up with lightning talks.
Yay.
Okay,
thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Sandy. I'm just very, very grateful to have experienced this tool. You've really helped kind of move society forward with this wonderful invention. So again, thank you so much. And we are going to use this time right now to jump right into our lightning talk. So give me a moment while I load up our initial slides. And there we are. So I want to thank you all for joining us on this third and final round of lightning talks for the 2020 SOS virtual workshop. While you get settled, I kind of want to just remind people to keep their webcams off and make sure you're on mute. If there are technical issues, please head to the chat and someone will be there from the SOS team to help you out. So let's go ahead and move right in. So I just want to say welcome, and I see the last few people coming in. I just want to make sure that their webcams are off, and here we go. My name is Zepecki. I'm a former educator and current manager of the SOS exhibit at NOAA headquarters, a collaborative position between NOAA's Office of Education and NOAA's Satellite Visualization Laboratory. We're going to kick off today's final round of lightning talks. Lightning talks are a great way for us to quickly share new ideas and programs and ideas to the whole group, being all of you. We split these lightning talks over by theme for the next couple, split them up into different themes based off of certain topics. So the first day we focused on best practices, such in education and managing ourselves during a global pandemic. The second day focused on society and outreach. And then today's theme is going to focus on visualizations, visualization development, and data resources. The following 4 talks focus on this theme and share visualizations in a way that use visualizations and data to develop and share content that supports the needs of your communities. I kindly ask that our presenters turn on their webcams to say hello and to type in the chat and let us know that they are present. So here are our talks that are going to be shown. Beth Russell, as you all have already met and seen, she's from NOAA Boulder, and she's going to be presenting some new data sets and visualizations for Boulder. So her title of the talk is What's New? Data Sets and Visualizations from NOAA Boulder. I will be presenting new data sets from DC, ship tracks. Kate Raisz from 42 Degrees North Media is going to be presenting on Spherical SOS as a spherical cinema. And then Raphael Day Miller from NOAA's Visualization Laboratory in Washington, D.C. is going to be showcasing NOAA satellites to SOS and where to find and download NOAA satellite data and imagery. Normally we are face-to-face for these talks, and these talks help to give us in a rapid format for a presenter running through through their slides in the course of about 5 minutes. Given that this year's format is virtual, we had to modify this process to help ensure that we stay on time. Our 4 talks are going to be grouped together in a 20-minute video. Beth is going to post a link to that video in the chat, and I'm going to ask you guys click on that window and actually watch through. So while you watch through this video, you can either watch through the YouTube link independently, but please make sure you take the time and actually watch it. We keep this Google Meet session open the whole time, so you can actually add your own comments and questions to the chat. We will reconvene in about 20 minutes from now, so approximately 2:20 p.m., so where we'll have question and answer session with the presenters. So as you may notice in the chat already, Beth has shared the link, and I'm going to invite you all to jump ahead and click that link and move forward with watching the video. Thank you.
Hi, I'm I'm Beth Russell from the Science on a Sphere team in Boulder, Colorado, and I'm here today to talk to you briefly about the new data sets we've been working on and some visualizations that we've created as well. So to get started, let's look at the SOS data sets. We kicked off the year with planet rotations. This is a great data set for comparing all 8 planets at once to show the different rotation rates. And you can really see the difference between those planets as they're all paired side by side. It's a really great astronomy data set to add to your playlists. Next up, we added the human climate niche. And what this data set does is looks at the land, the areas where people are located, and classifies them as more or less suitable based on conditions related to temperature and precipitation. It starts in 2020 and shows current conditions, and then shows how it's likely to change by 2070 based on the RCP 8.5 climate scenario. Some areas get better, some areas get worse. It's a nice data set to add to your climate change presentations. Next up, we added species richness data sets. We did it for amphibians, birds, and mammals. And it's a great way to look at the diversity of these different species around the world and to see just how many different types there are in different parts of the world. It's a really nice biology data set to mix in to our playlist. We worked with a researcher to get these put together, and he also provided for us another set looking at just the threatened species, again, of amphibians, birds, and mammals. And this is a nice way to look at areas where conservation would be most beneficial. So these are the areas where we have the most threatened species that can help direct conservation efforts to make sure we're really having a good impact in those regions. So take a look at all these data sets, make sure to get them added into your playlists. Now, this summer we've also worked with our communications team at NOAA to support some of their outreach efforts in getting the science of NOAA out. So it was really hot this summer and they needed some graphics to support that. So we took our land surface temperature data set here, we added the color bar and the timestamp and the NOAA logo and pushed this out to social media and other places as a way to help even more people see the various types of data sets that we have. This next example, we took our sea surface temperature anomaly, we cropped it down to just the Pacific, and then focused in, this clip is from 2015 when we had a strong El Nino, and the blob, the warmer water off the west coast there formed as well. This was used to support a research article that came out this summer on ocean heat waves and their impact on marine habitats. We also created some new data sets. So what we're looking at here is the Saharan air layer. We were able to generate this from a model that we run within our laboratory that looks at dust and how it travels around the planet. The Saharan air layer was in the news a lot this summer. So we started with this flat map here, but for social media and the news, we decided to wrap it around a globe and make it look a little more interesting to catch people's eye. Now, we weren't quite done yet, so we pulled it into After Effects. We added some camera angles and some lighting and shadowing, a starry background, and came up with this final product, which really makes for great supplemental graphics in the media and on social media and these various places, so that we're making sure to really broadly share our work. Here's another example. This one ended up on national television. It was a story on climate change, and in particular looking at the Arctic. July 2020 was the lowest July that we have had, and so this graphic from our classic snow and ice data set was used to create this. And then finally, we did a smoke graphic as well from all of the wildfires. Now, it's worth mentioning, we created these for our communications group, but we then pulled them back into SOS Explorer and created tours to go with them. So make sure to download the SOS Explorer app and go through the new tours that have been added, because you'll see a lot of these graphics there. If you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Stephen Zepecki, and I'm working from the United States capital, Washington, D.C., the occupied land of the Anacostia. I'm a contractor for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, otherwise known as NOAA, and it is my pleasure today to share with you a new visualization, ship tracks. I dedicated 10 years of my life as a high school biology and environmental science teacher in some of the nation's neediest schools. As my career shifted out of the classroom, I found myself still supporting science education and programming as the manager of the Science on the Sphere exhibit located at NOAA headquarters, a position shared between NOAA's Office of Education and Satellite Visualization Laboratory. I've made it my professional goal to raise the awareness of the plethora of Earth monitoring resources at NOAA. Those of you who are part of the SOS network may have seen my environmental data visualization and education resource emails. These emails share timely and relevant environmental data and visualization resources to allow educators to build on their content knowledge and share resources to make learning fun and accessible. With that being said, I want to recognize our undervalued public servants, educators. They carry out the responsibility not only to inform students of specific content, information, and facts, but in many instances they are the caretakers, mentors, role models, and voices for those individuals who are often not heard. Educators are diverse in their forms and their styles, and in their pedagogy and their methodologies, and in their need for resources is never ending. I want to take a moment and thank you for your time, your service, and your stewardship with our communities. I also want to acknowledge NOAA's 50 years of science service and stewardship. NOAA prides itself in being a trusted source of environmental monitoring, weather and climate predictions, and aid in the safety of transportation of people and goods. Now, before I jump into this new visualization, I have one final acknowledgement. I want to give a very genuine thank you to NOAA cartographer Megan Bartlett for her dedication to NOAA electronic navigation chart development and her commitment to producing GIS products for Science on the Sphere at NOAA. Without her effort at NOAA's National Ocean Service, NOAA leadership, and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, we would not be able to experience this beautiful new dataset. So let's get started. Sourced by VT Explorer, this visualization helps us see how AIS works. AIS stands for Automated Identification System and is the Maritime Navigation Safety Communication Systems adopted by the International Maritime Organization. The point of this system is to share a vessel's navigational data, including its identity, distance, speed and direction of travel, with nearby vessels for the primary purpose of maritime safety. Transponders on vessels and land automatically link to satellites to report vessels' locations, ensuring reliable ship-to-ship communications and allowing mariners to navigate waters safely. Let's review some of the important details of this visualization. This visualization focuses on August 6th to September 9th, 2019. Now, this is what the world would look like if it were flat and in SOS format. This visualization on SOS is truly humbling. We can clearly see how humans are really taking over Earth's one ocean. Notice the different colors in this visualization. Red hues are for large freight vessels such as tankers and cargo ships, and yellow, purple, and turquoise for smaller vessels. Observers can watch individual ships cross entire seas or stay within small localized zones. Each vessel track, long and short, represents 8 hours of travel. Some vessels travel much farther than others in 8 hours. Let's focus on Area 2. The story of globalization comes to life in this focus area. Notice the super busy zones near Hong Kong, Taiwan, Shanghai, Tokyo, and the Malacca Strait between the Malay Peninsula and the island Sumatra. Here, we see traffic jams on the water as the distance traveled within 8 hours decreases and even disappears while vessels wait their turn to go into port. This variation in vessel velocity creates pulses within this visualization. Now to the third focus area. Get out the way, and that's just what vessels should be doing during a hurricane. In this dataset, Hurricane Dorian beared down on the eastern coast of the United States, and the lack of vessels along the east coast shows the path of that major hurricane. This focus area highlights the daily movements of people. Turquoise fishing vessels south of the Galapagos go on their daily ventures out to sea to catch fish and their daily return to bring their catch home. The yellow passenger vessels around the Galapagos move tourists back and forth on daily tours. It's also important to notice that our oceans are not the only hot spot for travel. Larger rivers show the same daily movements of vessels. Notice the one yellow passenger vessel going towards Iquitos, Peru along the Marañón River. Larger rivers such as the Mississippi in the United States, the Amazon River in Brazil, and the Paraná rivers in Argentina are no strangers to larger freight vessels seen in red. Focus Area 5 moves us away from the equator and towards the poles. As we consider the impact of humans on the globe, we focus our attention to the Arctic Circle. The first week of September marks a time when sea ice is at its minimum. Here we can see the extended sea ice minimum where passenger vessels in yellow seem to stop at the edge of and cruise along the perimeter of the Arctic sea ice. Humans are changing the world, and this focus on the Arctic shows how anthropogenic global climate change is even affecting our polar ice caps. Science on the Sphere spectacularly showcases how humans shape and influence the environment. Consider this new AIS Ship Tracks dataset for Science on the Sphere as another tool to help people understand the world around them.
Hello, welcome, and thank you so much for coming to this lightning talk. I wish I could meet you all in person, but I'm very glad to meet you virtually. My name is Kate Raisz, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've been in this for a very long time, since 1985. And about 15 years ago, I started making spherical programs. So I've made several, about 15 now, for institutions like the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, the Aquarium of the Pacific, Ellis Island Immigration Museum, and others. And I approach this as a filmmaker. So I call what I do spherical cinema. So what do I mean by spherical cinema? Well, at its core, Science on Sphere is built on datasets. But to reach our audience, we really want to use film techniques. We want to use beautiful imagery. We want to use music. We want to use humor. We want to use drama. We want to use surprise. So I hope that the examples I'm going to show you achieve those goals. The first sample that I want to show you is called Currents, and it's from the Ocean Hall at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. I got to work with an amazing scientist named Colin Ware who does data visualizations. And we needed to talk about currents, but we wanted to hook our audience through some humor. So we decided to imagine what it would be like if you dumped rubber duckies on the ocean surface.
In a month's time, some duckies will travel great distances. Others will only creep along. At first, their movements seem chaotic, but underlying the confusion is a very complex system of surface currents.
The next sample is One Planet, and this program was shown at the Copenhagen Climate Summit. I got to work with Ned Gardner from NOAA and Maurice Henderson from NASA. And this one was challenging because we couldn't use narration. There are 5 official languages that are at the summit, and we couldn't narrate in all 5. So we used text on screen in all those 5 languages, but we really drove the emotion of this piece through music. And that was through the incredibly talented Robert Neufeld, who scored this for us. The last one I'm going to show you is called Made in Hong Kong. And boy, this was really different. It wasn't science, it was history. And it tells the story of Hong Kong's role in international trade. Again, I got to work with composers, which is such a gift. And these were composers here in Boston, but they were from China. And they were even able to find local musicians who played Chinese instruments. The other thing about this was we got to be pretty playful. So at one moment, we celebrate Chinese New Year by transforming the sphere into a lantern.
Just a bit like home. Hong Kong food exporters took advantage of these new markets. The Kowloon Company was one of the first to ship soy sauce overseas in 1917. And nearly 100 years later, it continues its traditional style. Today, the flavor of Hong Kong is celebrated in kitchens and restaurants far and wide.
So thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please shoot me an email. I'm always interested in hearing from you. Thank you again.
Hi, I'm Rafael de Amier, the lead for the NOAA Environmental Visualization Lab. Between the time that data is downlinked from the satellites and shown to you on the Science on the Sphere or on your laptop or cell phone, there's a series of transformations it goes through. My team, the NOAA Environmental Visualization Lab, is one of those teams that creates content for the Science on the Sphere, and we make it available in several other ways. So if you go to the Science on the Sphere page and you click on the datasets, you'll find datasets like this sea surface height anomaly, which we create at the lab. And on that page that we were looking at, if you notice, there's a link where you can go to the FTP site. This FTP site takes you to the public.sos.noaa.gov site, where you can go in and download the same datasets that are being used on the Science on the Sphere. Now, I highly recommend that you use an FTP client instead of using a browser, a web browser, to access this data. When you download that imagery, this is what you'll get. You'll get a full Earth view at the established sizes for the Science on the Sphere, and with that color table that's already been predetermined. Showing it on the Science on the Sphere is great, but what if you want to transform it or use it for something else? I'm going to show you today 3 different ways that the NOAA VisLab makes the data available. 1, we make it available through our NOAA View Global Data Viewer. In this viewer, you can click on the Add Data buttons and it takes you through a series of menus. Here I clicked on Ocean, then I clicked on Physical, then Height, and it loaded the data set, and I had the choice of showing either the 10-day averaging or the monthly or the yearly averaging. Once it's loaded, you get the series of tools that allow you to browse through time. You can also capture an image, or you can click on the download button and either download a single date, or you can download a series of images over a date range. When you click on the info button, you can actually get information about this data set. And there's your FTP access button again. But in this case, it's not the same FTP server as before. This is number 2, the second way that we make data available. This is FTP at our NOAA NESDIS Visualization Lab.noaa.gov FTP site. Now again, you want to make sure you use the FTP : / if you're going to use a web browser, but as I said before, an FTP client is based, just like I'm using here. Now when you go to the site, you'll notice that there's a series of folders in there, and when you click on the View folder, it opens up a long list of parameters. Now within those parameters, there's the sea surface height anomaly, SSHA. And when you click on that, it will show you this folder where you can go into images. There's also a About SSHA file that talks to you about what data is in there. I'm going to continue going down into images. There I have a choice between color or grayscale. You can already tell that there's more options available here. I'm going to click on the 10-day, and I'm presented with a long list that we've been producing over the years. If you download the grayscale image, you'll see that it's a full resolution, so it's not at the Science on the Sphere resolution. This is just a quick list of all the different layers that we actually make available on that FTP site. Or download the those explainer README files that you can find on the FTP site. And I'm going to now go to 3. The third way that you can access the data in GIS, you can overlay a series of layers. Each one is a different field of information. One might have roads, another one might have place names, and each one is maybe coming from a different source. That's the beauty of GIS and its interoperability. So this site here, gis.nnvl.noaa.gov, and if you type in this full address, you'll be going to our REST services on our NNVL server, and you'll see the same list that you should already be familiar with this list. It's the same list that we were looking at before, and I'm going to be going into the SSHA, sea surface height anomaly, and there I'm going to find also the 10 days or the monthly or the yearly, and when I click on the 10-day one, I can even browse it quickly by clicking on the ArcGIS JavaScript link, and this is the full URL of this data. So what can I do with that data? Well, here I've logged into my NOAA Geo platform, which is ArcGIS Online, and I'm going to open up a new map. I can also use the desktop version of this if I wanted to, and where it tells me to enter the data, I'm going to enter that same link that I entered before into here, and bang, here it is. Loaded on my map, I have the sea surface height anomaly that I was looking at before. Make it either a 2D or a 3D map application with whatever widgets I want to add to it. So these are the 3 ways that we make data available to the whole world.
For those of you who are just finishing up the video and pulling in, we are going to ask you kindly to turn off your cameras, maybe mute, and if you have any questions or comments, we appreciate it if you put those actually in the chat box so that we can kind of organize them and then process them in an appropriate way. We have approximately 10 minutes worth of questions that I'm actually going to get started with. In order for fairness, I'm going to kind of go in order. I'm going to say this is one of my favorite kind of sections, all about visualization, data, and resources. I was a high school bio teacher, as some of you have seen in those videos, in the video. And it's been my pleasure to be able to work with Science on the Sphere and be able to process visualizations and science in a way that makes our Earth more understandable and the science behind it more accessible. So props to everyone here that showed off some of their great visualizations. You guys are all contributing to moving science forward and keeping our communities healthy, wealthy, wise, and smart about how we can keep going. I'm going to start off with some of these questions. I'm going to start off with a question for Beth from Annette Brinkley. So this is actually for more Beth and Stephen. Which of the visualizations that you shared for SOS and versus SOS Explore? Beth, I'll let you start.
So I believe our planet rotations is available on both. And I can't remember about the human climate niche, but we could certainly add it. And then the same goes for the species richness data sets. Those are all easy for us to add to Explore. So we can, I don't think we have yet, but we can tack that onto our list. The goal is to get more and more data sets into Explore as we're adding them to SOS. And certainly if you all have requests, let us know and we'll see what we can do in terms of getting stuff into Explore.
Well, I have a request because that would be my data set. So that's going to eventually be thrown onto the Sphere, and I hope, and hopefully in the catalog too.
I was going to say, I want your data set for the catalog so we can get it out to all of our users.
And then Beth, can we talk about the process briefly about how people can submit information, just so if they do have their own visualizations and data sets? I think this is an appropriate time to kind of share that. If you can do it in about 20 seconds, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have a data set to share, go ahead and email myself and Hillary. We'll work with you to see if it has a home in our catalog. We have to make sure things are scientifically accurate and have general interest to the network. But once we get there, then we'll add it into our catalog. We'll work with you to get that description up. But it all starts with emailing us.
Absolutely. All right, cool. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump on a question for myself because we're going in order from that sense. From Scott Muller, Stephen, do you have to get non-public data for ship tracks to work in collaboration to get full coverage? If I recall, global coverage is due to commercial satellites and it was always tricky to get for free. And that's absolutely true, Scott. I praised Megan Bartlett in my video because she was actually the one who really pushed to get this data forward for a project that she was working on. So all credit really definitely should go to her in terms of collecting that data and processing it and getting the shape files for it. She was absolute godsend for that. But she had to definitely jump through a lot of hurdles to do that. So we got our information from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and because all the data that's associated with boats is tied into personal identifiable information, we had to ensure that this information was actually being kept classified, kept quiet, and not shared or distributed. So we had to prove the fact that we were sharing this information in a way that was not going to exploit the people that were actually sharing their information for this. So it is very, very, very challenging. I can't put enough berries to that in terms of collecting that type of data. It took a lot of time. It took about 8 months just to convince them to share that information with us. And that's only about 1/6 of total global Earth ship tracks that have been shared. And it's all dependent on who keeps their receivers on. Some people could turn off the receivers and you may have a ship track that's there for a little bit and then disappear. So it's extremely variable. Lots of different companies own that type of information. And there's a lot of protection for those individuals who share that information. So thank you for asking that question. Let's see, for Kate. Joe asked, how do you handle the challenges of storytelling on the globe when half the audience is on the other side of the world? That's a great question.
By the way, I can't see my own webcam. So Stephen, are you seeing me?
You look fabulous.
Oh, excellent. Well, it's the orange background, you know?
It's perfect.
So thanks so much to everyone who's here, by the way, that I really wish I were seeing you in person. And I forgot to do a shout out to Dan, who also worked on the Ocean Hall and many other of the Sphere programs with me. So thanks, Dan. This is a huge challenge of how to do global storytelling, local stories within a global medium. And I think everyone here has experimented with picture-in-picture. I think we've found that it's a little clunky visually, but it works. You can repeat the image on all four sides, so you guarantee that any person standing watching the sphere gets that story. We've also done some zooming techniques where we still are repeating the image, but now we're zooming it and making it feel like a layer, a little bit less visually clunky than the picture-in-picture, but it takes way more processing time to do that in After Effects. We've tried some things where it's almost like a magnifying glass, so you're using that circular image to zoom in. But I tell you, each time I have to do it, I pull my hair out because it's really hard.
It's very challenging to deal with people all around, and especially time zone differences. For me, we're dealing with international stuff was always kind of a pain. So props to you on that. It's impressive. Very, very impressive. I'm going to jump over to Raphael for a question for him from Jan Thomas. Just curious if the VizLab has a plan to transition away from the FTP servers now that Google has started moving support for it. Rafa?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. That's a really good. That's a really good
Great
question, and it is one that we have been balancing out. We have a lot of legacy users who depend on the FTP system, and SOS also is built around the FTP system. The VizLab itself, because we serve it in so many different ways, as you saw through the in that lightning talk, really lightning, fast-speaking lightning talk that I did. Just pause it later. You'll be able to get all the links and everything calmly. But as you can see there, we're kind of like ready to deploy in several different ways, including HTTPS or map services. We do worry about some of our end users who might be too dependent on FTP, but we're here to help them transition.
Great, thank you. Because of timing and such, I'm going to do a question that's for everyone that's out there, and I'm going to ask this. This is actually from Thomas Quayle, and it's to everyone again. Have other organizations or data providers reached out to any of you about exporting visualizations to be used throughout networks or on SOS? Or has there been an interest in doing so when looking at making these? So again, the question is, other organizations reached out to you about exporting visualizations throughout the network?
So I can say that I've had scientists reach out to me who are working on like an NSF grant, and they need to include outreach in that. And they recognize SOS as a great way to do that. So they include as part of their project data set creation out to the network. Some of those are still waiting to hear about funding, but that's one example of folks reaching out to us. I've also found that when I reach out to people, so like those species richness data sets, I happen to find those online, but I reached out to the scientist who created them, and he was more than happy to work with me when I explained that I would be using them for the SOS network. So we get really positive reception when we tell people what we're going to be doing.
Great. And I'm going to actually finish off with one question for Kate. Kate, can you, and this is from Michael Starman, can you comment on how you make creative decisions about live action footage on the sphere? Naturally, there are challenges, obviously, using rectangular footages on the sphere. So what are the pros, cons, and or any thoughts you have with that?
Yeah, I actually don't like talking heads, interview subjects on the sphere because it's very hard to make it look good. So what I've found is that voices work well, but that just standard video, again, we tried it at Ocean Hall. We put it in rectangles and it kind of worked. But since then, I think we've moved away from that visually, moved away from the rectangular superimposed, because, most video footage comes in this either rectangle or 16:9. So I think it's been a challenge to come up with new ways to break from that, that's why I talk about spherical, like always thinking, how do I work with the roundness of this? And it's required a lot more After Effects work than I ever expected.
Well put. Well put. Yeah, I think all of us are feeling that same thing. So we are actually just at the end of our question and answer session for the lightning talks. I want to thank everyone for sharing and being able to present. A lot of great questions were shared with us, and we are actually going to distribute those questions to our other presenters so that they can maybe help answer the actual questions that people have out there. We have a 10-minute break before our breakout sessions. I do, however, want to remind people that today from 4:20 to 4:30 p.m., so that is Eastern time. At the end of the breakout sessions, we are asking everyone to come back together for some final thoughts and comments and some prizes that we have to award. So until then, here's your break. And Carrie, if you would like to add anything, let me know. If not, then we will push forward with the break.
No, Rafa has a comment.
Thank you. Sorry, Rafa.
No worries. Thank you, Carrie. I just wanted to mention I did put in there a link to the REST services, one of the REST services, which is serving tiles. It's not a WMTS service, but we do have tiles because it does improve the efficiency at which we serve the map data. Just to answer that other question about MTS file services.
All right, everyone. Thank you very much. And
thank you so much again.
Enjoy.